So welcome everybody. My name is Cassidy Stewart. I'm the Canadian Sales Manager for JobAdder, and I'll be moderating our panel today. Unfortunately, we are experiencing a little bit of technical issues with one of our speakers, so hopefully she'll be popping in here shortly. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our Q&A conversation around redesigning ROI in a candidate short market. In this Q&A, we're going to take you through what recruiters are doing, what we've seen prove successful in redesigning their ROI strategy in this new COVID reality. Our experts are going to share repeatable recruiter experiences, tips and tricks, and best practices to help you build not only a solid foundation, but to share how best to make that a measurable experience for your organization. So please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. We will try to get to them throughout. Otherwise, at the end of the session, we'll also be sitting at one of the networking tables to carry on the conversation. So feel free to ask away. So the first speaker that you see here is Brian Wilson. He's the North American Regional Director for JobAdder, which is a simple to use ATS and CRM software provider. Feel free to stop by our booth if you haven't yet, or if we're new to that. Previous to JobAdder, Brian worked as a recruiter for over 10 years, which included running his own executive search and staffing agencies. He understands the recruiting world and the challenges and opportunities recruiters are faced with, unlike any other. Brian's worked with forward-thinking recruiting and staffing teams who understands the difference between good and bad softwares and why that matters. Recruitment teams looking to continually innovate, keep ahead of the curve, and stay competitive often lean into Brian's expertise to help pave the way for their success. Our other speaker, who we'll hopefully be hearing from if we can get the technical issues resolved, will be Megan Strout. She's the founding partner and CEO of Tack Advisors, which is the only full-service recruiting and consulting firm that is dedicated to progressing the role of administrative professionals. Megan's got 6 years of experience recruiting for executive assistants, personal assistants, and chiefs of staff to support the world's most influential leaders. Prior to transitioning her career to talent acquisition, Megan worked in luxury hospitality for over a decade with the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carlton, and the Breakers. While working in hospitality, she provided 5 diamond leadership and administrative support to clients and guests around the world, and recruited, onboarded, and trained highly efficient teams. So thanks to both. Like I said, hopefully we can get Megan in here and get those technical issues resolved. But for the time being, I guess we'll start with you, Brian. So I think the first area that we want to talk about is what are the key areas where recruiters should focus on saving time, and why is that important? Oh, I don't know if we can hear you, Brian. Okay, well, it seems like we have a little bit of technical delays for both of our speakers today. So unfortunately, I haven't practiced my juggling skills today to keep everyone entertained for a minute, but we're going to try to quickly resolve this and be right back to you. Can someone just message in the chat in case this is an issue on my end with the audio, and just let me know if you can hear Brian? Okay. So it looks like we're having a bit of issues, but just to give you a heads up in the meantime of what we will be talking about once our speakers have the technical issues resolved, is that we're going to go over what key areas recruiters should focus on to save time and why that matters.
Hello?
And he's back. Okay. So let's just circle back to that, Brian. So what were the
We promised we did do some testing before this call, so I don't know what happened. But Cassidy, I know that the question that I was trying to answer resolved around, what key areas should recruiters focus on to save time? Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And why that's important.
Well, I think we all know it's important. We only have so much time in the day, right? So the more time that you can save, the better you're going to do at not only work but at life as well. So I'll go into some of my points. What what we've found working with now hundreds, if not thousands, of recruiting and staffing agencies is that the process seems to be the largest bottleneck in terms of time wastedness, right? If that's a word. I think that a lot of recruiting and staffing companies look at process from a very high level in terms of we do business development, we make phone calls, we get active positions, we fill those roles, right? They see their process as being maybe 6, 7, 10 steps, whatever that might be, but they haven't defined it further in terms of the little things, right? The things that actually add up and waste that time during the day. So when you think about if you want to save time, you need to invest upfront in the process first. And when I talk about process, I'm not talking about just those high level steps. I'm talking about every single little thing that happens in between. So, for example, when a candidate is sourced from our team, what's the touch points that should be happening with these candidates along the way, not just when we're recruiting them, but maybe between the initial recruiter screen or interview, between the time that we submit them to the client, in between interviews, follow-ups, once they've been placed. If we could design the perfect recruiter that never had to sleep, that never had to eat, what would that person do, right? So focus on those little small details without thinking about the technology before you do this, right? Technology can amplify things in a good way if you do it right, but it can equally and even more so amplify things in a bad way, right? So if you don't get this right in the beginning, it can have compounding effects in the end, both good and bad, right? So as you define that and you define, what parts of these process can be automated and cannot, what parts of these should be automated and should be not, that's when you can start to then define the types of technology you might add after the fact, right? If Megan was here, I know that she would have a few other details to add about this as well. So I don't know if you want to go over some of her notes there, Cassie, if you'd like me to.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that Megan had brought up was looking at how much revenue each role in your organization is responsible for generating, and being cognizant of what tasks you're assigning different roles in the organization. And if it's a role that can be done just as effectively by someone that is not earning as much for your company, be smart in delegating those tasks. And I think that's a valid point. Not only looking at what can be automated, but what can be delegated down to lower earning roles within the company. Um, there's also you and I both know she puts a strong emphasis on solid onboarding and training processes that are self-guided, like ours that's built into JobAdder, but really, trying to offload as much of that from a higher role as possible and letting people be self-starters and self-drivers, and then just a focus on working smarter, not harder. And I'm hoping that we can still get her in here and she can elaborate on that somewhat. I just wanted to touch on one question that came into the chat. Jamie Herbert from Capstone asked how we define ROI in this conversation. I think it's a really comprehensive look at investment, not just of financial investment, but time investment, being that those are the two kind of scarce resources. And now that the landscape has changed with COVID happening, right? How can we best invest not only our money but our time to redesign an optimal workflow? So hopefully that answers your question, Jamie. Feel free to post in the chat if that's not quite what you were looking for. But on to the next question for you, Brian, is once you've looked at that process and you've figured out where time can be saved, where should you reinvest that time as a recruiter, as an owner of a recruiting company? Um, you know, and what key activities will really drive the most value for your organization?
Megan would say, her typical thing: people, process, and profit, right, in that order, always. Um, I would say the reinvestment of the time saved is all about investing back into your people. I don't just mean the recruiting team. I also mean the people that you're doing business with, the candidates, the clients, the partners that you have, right? So if we're saving time on the individual steps that we need to do from a recruitment process, the time that you have back is to spend that time with people, right? The technology should get out of the way so that we can spend more time with people. We're a people business, right? So candidates have a lot of options out there, and a lot of your competitors might be looking at saving money in terms of chatbots and doing more with less in terms of maybe we don't want to hire as many recruiters. We want to supplement people with technology, and I don't think that's the right approach. Right? We're not going to replace recruiting professionals with technology. Instead, we should be using that technology to give more time back to our recruiters so they can spend more time with those people. So look at the metric for what you measure instead of how many calls can a recruiter make in a day to how many high quality calls can a recruiter do in a day. If we've supplemented this technology to help us do some of these small things that recruiters shouldn't be doing, let's take that initial touch point with candidates from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Let's use that time to reinvest back in the community so that we are driving people back to the things we want to drive them back to, essentially. Make it human, make it genuine. Stop trying to automate the things that should not be automated, and reinvest that time back into those people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if Megan was here, she'd kind of bucket it similarly to how you did, in terms of relationships, right? Investing in client relationships, candidate relationships, and then employee relationships, right? She always mentions that she sees a 200 to 300% boost in what people are able to bill in terms of revenue year over year. So one of her keys to success is keeping that tight staff, and I think that sometimes goes overlooked in this world as well. So
she's also mentioned to me that one of the things they do with the time savings that they've had is to build relationships with other recruiting companies, right? Because what happens, being focused in one particular niche, having that focus without being a generalist per se. Tack Advisors focuses primarily on administrative professionals. And they're doing that for a reason, not because they can't recruit other people, but because they're building this community around what they do, right? And so when we're talking about reinvesting that time back into the communities that you build, if you have a strong focus on what you do, hey, we focus on administrative professionals, it's not that you're not going to have calls with other people that might be looking for other types of roles, whether those are candidates or clients. So some of their extra time is actually spent building relationships with other recruiting companies, right? And having those referral networks to say, hey, when I do speak with an IT person or a marketing person, I can still help this person and send them to a partner, right? So I think that's another good way of looking at it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think just looking at the chat here, Jamie, not to worry, we're going to get into how to capitalize and measure that return on investment. So I guess we should move along a little bit quicker so we can get to the juicy part. But Brian, we look at thousands of recruiting businesses a year, and one of the things that always kind of separates the leaders from the pack, in my mind, is how the teams that do think about that workflow, reinvest that time and energy into those relationships. Then there's that difference in terms of who's able to capitalize on that investment and what do you see from your perspective in terms of what separates the people that are really thriving in the COVID reality to the people that are kind of surviving despite trying the best to optimize?
I touched on it a second ago, but the firms we work with that seem to be having the most success in this reality are people that that have a focus in one particular area or areas, right? If you're a larger firm, moving away from that generalist mindset, and any job order is a good job order, and really focusing in on a specific niche, a specific geographic location, whatever that might be. So as an example, I guess I'll just use Tack again, right? Being able to say, hey, this is the specific functional area that we focus on, and adding as much value to that community, not just through placements, but through any other ways necessary. So, newsletters that help educate our community on not even just careers and the job market, but what interests them in particular, right? Adding that value back. To help them educate themselves, help them better themselves through their career or otherwise, right? Those are the people that I see thriving the most, because with that extra time savings that you have, the focus that you have can be much more pinpointed, if you will, right? If you're very generalist in nature, especially for smaller firms, you don't know what to do with that extra time other than just add more calls, just add more, brute strength, right? You don't have that time to be strategic as much with that free time that you might have created for yourself with a better process and with better technology. I don't know if that answered your question completely, but
yeah, for sure. I know when we had talked about this with Megan previously, she'd also mentioned that in Tack Advisors' case, they're able to raise their fees and increase their fee structure because of the strength of relationships they're having with candidates, and due to the fact that it's a candidate short market, that the leverage comes from having that candidate network at the end of the day. And so by having that, and by having candidates that keep reaching back out to her for future opportunities, it really allows her to kind of raise the price with her clients. And so I think at the end of the day, all of those things are really great as well. But if you're not going to increase your bandwidth and have more clientele, being able to raise your fees and still have good relationships with your clientele and have them keep coming back is ultimately one of the biggest ways to increase that capitalization, right? But yeah, so I think once you are capitalizing on that, where do you see the differences in terms of how people are tracking success and that increase in revenue across the board?
Yeah, this is the good one. I think that people actually want to get to, right? The best way to think about this, I guess, is in two different buckets, right? Quantitative, qualitative. What are the things that we need to measure that's more data driven? So I guess let's start there, right? Because that's the easier one. It's not just about time to fill. We need to go beyond those metrics and start to understand the individual metrics between each stage in our process, right? So we've already talked about defining that process in detail, but then using systems, like the CRM, like the ATS, other components that might be connected into this, but to measure what's happening in between those stages, right? And it's not necessarily as a way to micromanage your team, but as a way to understand what's working and what's not working in these stages. So a good example would be, instead of looking at just that time to fill, how long does it take to us to get a job order to fill that job order? Well, how long is it taking between getting that job order and the first step, getting a recruiter on the phone with a candidate that's been identified as a good potential fit? How long does it take between that internal handoff from a recruiter to an account manager? How long does it take to, once we've submitted to that client? And once you start measuring those stages, what you really want to start doing is then drilling down individually by recruiter, by team. How do we mix and match this by client, right? What and again, it's not from a micromanagement perspective. Brian's not doing as good, I'm going to whip him into shape. It's looking at these lead and lag indicators of individuals to see what's working, because we all know that not every recruiter is the same as every other recruiter. Every salesperson is not the same. It's very hard to duplicate an individual, but you can look for indicators of what people are doing right and what people are doing wrong. So if Jim on my team, on average, compared to the rest of the company, is moving the ball faster than Susan, well, then what is Jim doing that Susan is not doing? Right? And maybe only parts of the process he's doing better than other parts of the process. So it's really honing in to be able to take those lessons you've learned from those individual recruiters and then help apply those to the other people in your team. So when you have your weekly stand-ups, you know that Jim is the right guy to bring in to talk about how he gets from submission to initial interview faster on average than anybody else in the team, right? And then if you take that one step further from your individual recruiters and bring it into your clients, now you can start to understand, okay, well, why is, client A taking on average so much longer than client B, right? In this market where we are time poor, but job orders are easier to get, why would we spend 50 to 60% more time working with client B when client A is getting us there much faster, right? Or what can we do to educate client B on what they need to do in order to actually win this talent, right? And let's do it with data. Let's not just do it with, hey, we want you to respond quicker, but let me show you a report, anonymized, of course, with your client information, of how quickly on average client A and C are filling job orders versus you, client B, and why that is. It looks like on average, when we get you to the submission stage, you're taking 50% longer to respond than other clients that are actually filling their job orders, right? So that's and again, you need to have a good CRM, a good ATS where you can track this data that's very process oriented. We all know the garbage in, garbage out kind of a thing. So that was phase one of how to track it from a quantitative perspective. Now the other part is more, I guess, qualitative in nature, and those are the things that I don't see many recruiting companies doing at all. These are asking the right questions to your candidates, to your clients, maybe getting to get answers that you might not want to hear, right? So these are things like NPS surveys. These are, asking people, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And not just the people that you had a successful placement with, but especially the people that you didn't. So a good practice to get into is, in between stages of your process, not every stage of your process, you don't want to kill people here, but, sending out these NPS surveys to understand where you can improve, and then actually taking that feedback and actually improving, right? So if there's one thing you get from this today, it's start asking more hard questions, getting out of your comfort zone, to figure out where you need to take things next. I could go on and on about this, but I hope that helped with your question there.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty thorough answer. I do want to apologize for anyone that's trying to use the closed caption. It looks like there's a bit of a technical difficulty happening there as well. For anyone that is interested in a recorded version of the session and preferably with closed captions, it looks like the conference will be providing that afterwards. And if you have any questions or anywhere that you'd like to see us elaborate, feel free to swing by the JobAdder booth. We'll try to throw together some written notes for you so that I know there's some people that have mentioned that that's a non-optional for them, that they have the closed captioning or written help, which I guess this isn't really addressing if you can't see the closed captions on this. So we will definitely be trying to address that afterwards, and I'll mention it in the chat as well. But to the next question. So Brian, what's the one place, that you would recommend recruiters start looking at their time investments and really start to drill into how they can start that process of time-saving journey?
Well, let me come at it from a leadership perspective first, right? Being the owner of a firm or the leader of a team. We've already talked about the process, right? So I'm not going to go into that as much. I mean, that is the one place I recommend you start. But in terms of the most bang for your buck, the thing that's going to have the biggest effect on your business is if you don't know how to define that process, right? We can all admit when we're not good at those things. Hire somebody that is, right? I think a lot of recruiters, staffing professionals are very A-type people. We know we can do it. We're going to do it. We're just going to get in there and do it, right? Fake it till you make it, right? That'll get you far. But what will get you even further is to realize where you're weak, and maybe weak's not the right word, but where you don't have as much education, and find people who are. So hire a coach. Hire somebody that knows, has been there before, that can help you define these things. The investment that you put into a coach will pay itself back tenfold, right? Not just somebody to come in and tell you what to do, but to bounce ideas off of, to help you to really define what's going to be successful in your business, right? So I think hiring coaches, but also hiring other people in your business that might know things better than you, right? So maybe that's an operations leader, maybe that is a marketing director or marketing person, maybe that's a data analyst, right? We all know that you're not going to succeed just by adding more recruiters and more brute force. So start thinking like, I know it's funny to say this, start thinking like a non-staffing company, and look at the departments that you need to hire for, right? If you want to get more applicants, and all you're thinking about is posting more job ads, that's probably not the best way to get more applicants, but you're also probably not trained as a marketer. So maybe you should hire a marketing person to help you with that. I think some of the most successful companies I see right now are people that have hired marketing professionals, hired data analysts, hired rent a CTO type people to come in and really get them out of their comfort zone and start pushing the boundaries that way, right? So if you're gonna, if you got extra time based on some of these strategies we talked about, invest it back in yourself by hiring other people that are smarter than you in certain areas.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if Megan was on the call, she can kind of speak to the value of that once you're at that scale. But even for the little guys, right? When you're just kind of starting out and you maybe don't have the resources to bring in an external counsel, and she's big on, look at your team, right? And it goes back to look at what roles are doing which jobs and do that simple exercise of stop, start, and continue. What's the biggest pain point to each role? And, if you could wave a magic wand or bring in an automated technology to help with those single biggest pain points, start to investigate into that and be smart. If you're on that smaller end of town for now, be smart about setting up processes that are going to allow you to scale quickly and capitalize on this market, because there's money to be made out there right now. I just wanted to look at the Q&A real quick, Brian. So the first question was, what's your time frame recommendation to job application to initial recruiter candidate contact, and what could prevent that from happening?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. I would have a different answer if you were in staffing and working, in light industrial versus, if you were a retained recruiting firm, working in financial, right? So, unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all to that. And is this an inbound lead or an outbound lead, right? In general, I think you're talking about two touch points, right? So when somebody reaches out to you as like an inbound lead, whether they're a candidate or a client, I think automating that so they almost get an instantaneous response is the best way to go, right? If you're not sending at least letting people know that you've received their information immediately, so they're not like, did it come in or not? Hopefully that's already clear, right? If you're in a high volume staffing, it's not necessarily about how quickly can you get on the phone with each applicant. It's about how quickly can you get on the phone with each qualified applicant, because we know there's a much higher ratio of applicants versus roles in those types of industries, right? So I would think more around the lines of how can we qualify people as quickly as possible on the front end and have as many meaningful, qualified conversations with these people if you're in a high volume type role. So think about splitting your onboarding process up kind of in two phases, right? And what can we do to kind of quickly weed out the non-serious people, the non-qualified people, without pushing them away? It's a delicate balance. Whereas if you're in the professional space, honestly, I mean, it's as soon as possible, right? If they're a qualified candidate, the measurement to initial conversation really should be measured in hopefully minutes or hours, definitely not days, when we're talking about high value positions in a market like this. So you want to get that touch point out immediately, no matter what type of role you're in, and if you're in that professional space, really, it's as soon as possible. I think in any industry, you'll find that the percentage by which you have potential success in closing that deal or making that placement is predicated based on how quickly you can respond to inbound leads. So try to get that to minutes, honestly.
Makes sense. And then the next question from Sudhir Kumar, sorry if I mispronounced that. What is the best way to connect candidates or the marketers to reach? So I think that's probably in reference to when we were saying bringing back the marketers to handle your optimization of workflow.
So was the question, when's the best time to bring in a marketer? Is that right? Or
yeah, I guess that's probably what he's asking.
Well, again, this is not a one-size-all-fits answer. It really depends on the individual company and where you're at. I would say as soon as financially possible. I would even say, if it's possible and you're just starting out, investing in a marketing person or a part-time marketing person or technology person should be as high on the list as hiring other recruiters in the beginning. So it's all about defining that process and then setting yourself up to scale. So if you define that process and you want to start scaling, whether you're at 2 recruiters, 3 recruiters now, bringing in that marketing person or IT person or both is what will get you to that scale. But you better be darn sure you have that process in place first, because if you hire a good marketing person, having too many leads can also be a problem, right? I know that probably didn't answer it perfectly, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
We are coming towards the end here. So if anyone else has any other questions that they'd like to use the Q&A function, feel free to pop them in there. Afterwards, if we do run out of time here, we will be at the networking table as well, and hopefully we can get Megan to join us if we can get the technical issues resolved. But I think one of the biggest questions, Brian, is once everything's optimized, once you've figured out that workflow and you kind of gotten as efficient as possible and business is booming, how do you know when is the time to scale and when should you bring in more people?
Well, let's be honest. When you know it's time to scale, probably when your husband, your wife, your significant other comes in and it's been 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, and they ask you if you're ever going to show up to a family meal again, right? All jokes aside, it's knowing when to scale also can come back into metrics, right? We were talking about metrics a little bit earlier. You're not going to be perfect at this in the beginning, especially as a founder of a small company or something like that. But if you start to use metrics like recruiter to job ratios. Right, I know Megan is a big proponent of this as well. Again, as long as the data is in there, what is reasonable? Start by tracking it, because you're not going to know what that metric is in the beginning, right? It's a little bit of a tracking the data initially. Okay, I can see that right now, our recruiters, we work in executive search, they can handle about maybe 5 searches at a time before things start getting squirrely. So that's something that only you'll have to track over time, but pretty soon you'll start to get a good handle on. Once we get to 6 jobs per recruiter, we need to hire another person, right? And you'll know, it's easy to know, because you're going to have to start turning jobs away, right? And once you get to that point and you say, okay, great, I know that our sweet spot is 5 jobs, 3 jobs, 7 jobs, whatever your metric happens to be. It's different for every niche. That's going to be one of your best indicators to know. Once we start pushing that, and I'm getting all my recruiters out of their comfort zone, we're starting to see that burnout, and that metric of recruiter to job ratio is trending higher than I want it. That's usually the time when you want to hire more people or want to start scaling. Is probably my best advice.
It makes sense, and I think Megan would probably agree with that. She's scaled quite a bit in the last 2 years. I know she mentioned that she had started just before the pandemic hit, and she's grown from 2 employees to 12 in that time. So I think if anyone is interested in maybe when is the right time to add headcount, or tips and tricks as to how she did that so quickly, like I said, she'll be joining us at some of the networking tables over the course of the conference, specifically right after this session ends. So definitely come by to pick her brain on that. I think that was all the questions that had come in. Did you have something to say, Brett?
No, I was going to say that I know in particular, Tack Advisors, as they're growing, they're really looking at building relationships with other recruiting companies as well, because they have a lot of, they're placing administrative professionals, which means they're working directly with a lot of CEOs, everybody. And these CEOs are saying, hey, we need you to fill these roles. We need to fill those. And they're being smart, and they're saying, no, that's not our niche. That's not what we focus on. But they want to be able to refer people to partners that can help them with those roles. So I know that was one thing that that she advised other people do as well, especially if they're focusing on those niches, but specifically wanted to build some relationships with some of these recruiters on the phone so they could start sharing some of those warm leads that they've been getting.
Absolutely. And feel free to reach out to Brian, myself, or Megan on LinkedIn to connect if you had any follow-up questions about the session. I think we went over a ton of useful content, both in kind of the grand scheme of things, but also really specific areas where you can start to focus in on today. I think the overall message was that save time and save energy by doing a top to bottom kind of overhaul as to how you do business. Become as efficient as possible. And it will lead to much greater profits at the end of the day. I think, to me, the 5 things that we kind of talked about that really stand out as differentiators between those leading the pack and the pack itself, now that we're in kind of that COVID world, was number 1, the value of time to different members of your organizations, and thinking about quantifying what an hour of time is worth to the founder of the company versus the lowest level coordinator or scheduler, and being smart as to, is this task necessary to happen at this level, or could we shuffle it down a few levels in the organization and use that time more effectively to generate revenue. I think the power of delegation and automation can't be overstated, but within reason. Right, you run the risk of, if you go too aggressively with that, you can impair some relationships that are key to doing business in this industry. So I think that was number 1, the value of time to different members of the organization, and delegating and automating as much as you can without hurting relationships. Number 2, to me, that really struck a chord was The importance of setting a proper process and workflow comes from the top down. And so if the founder or the CEO is looking at optimizing their process and being really analytical in terms of what their time is worth, that will naturally cascade down the organization. Whereas if you try to go bottom to top, eventually it'll peter out and not be as effective truly, because you're not saving the most valuable time in the organization. So that was number two. The importance of setting a proper process and workflow really comes top down to be most effective. The third most important piece that I found today is once you redesign your workflow to be as optimized as possible, where you reinvest that time really matters. And investing it into relationships, both with candidates and clients, is really the logical place to start. But investing it with employees is also a very, very logical way to grow your business and to keep earning more and more revenue by preventing churn. So I think that was the third one, was redesigning your workflow and reinvesting that time into relationships. The fourth one that really kind of struck a chord with me was it's important to capitalize on that reinvestment, but it's just as important to track those improvements that you're making and make sure that you're actually earning from the reinvestment into those relationships, or else then tweaking how you go about reinvesting that time. And then the last point that was kind of, really prevalent to me was start with your leadership team when you're looking at areas to improve, and then it will naturally come down the chain. How about you, Brian? Anything stick out to you in terms of, I mean, I know you did most of the talking, but when you're looking at these types of organizations, anything stick out to you in terms of that maybe we didn't cover?
No, I think that was really good. I mean, getting just getting the metrics right. We talked about going beyond time to fill, looking at recruiter ratios, and the qualitative and quantitative type measurements. Asking the questions you don't necessarily want to hear the answer to, but doing it all the time, and using that as a metrics to grow your business.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that the most valuable advice usually comes from the questions we don't want to ask. But so I hope everyone gets to take away some valuable insights from our session here today. Again, apologies on our behalf for the technical difficulties, not being able to have Megan in here today, and the issues with the closed captioning. Hopefully we can get that all sorted out for the next session. Anyone that has any questions, feel free to pop by the JobAdder booth. We'll try to get you the recording. There's a chance that we may even be able to do another recording with Megan and circulate that as well. So
we can show you some of these reports that we've been talking about as well, if you want to see some of the actual data that we talked about in terms of the measurements and stuff.
Absolutely. And I know one of our tables is dedicated to live demos. So if there's something that's top of mind, feel free to pop into our booth and we can give you a look under the hood. So that wraps up our session. We're going to go move over to the networking table. So feel free to join us there. Feel free to drop by the JobAdder booth. There's 2 QR codes on the deck here that you can feel free to scan. One will take you to JobAdder on the left. One will take you to Tack Advisors on the right. And feel free to reach out to Megan as well. I know she's pretty bummed that she didn't get to make it out here to join us, but she's very interested to talk to you guys all as well. So with that being said, that's a wrap for us, and hopefully we'll see you at the networking table. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, this is Megan Strout, CEO of Tack Advisors. I wanted to jump in and say hello since I wasn't able to join you live earlier this week during the JobAdder and Tack Advisors session. which was all about how to create ROI in a candidate short market. So I wanted to share some additional thoughts and notes that the team at JobAdder shared with you from my perspective. And so I noticed that one of the questions that was shared by the team was, what do we define as ROI? And I would say, in specific to this conversation of being in a candidate short market, where are you spending your time and also spending your money as a leader in an organization, and advising your team and your organization to be spending their time to create the greatest value to generate, in this case, as many candidates as possible, because that's where we're in need at this point in the marketplace. And so a couple of things that we do at Tack, which I think were mentioned, but wanted to elaborate on, is that we really do a white glove service for our candidates from start to finish. Every single one of our candidates that we work with goes through a 30-minute phone screen for us to determine what their wants and needs are in the market, and also to confirm where they are geographically at this point, since a lot has changed during the pandemic, and what their desired compensation is. And then from there, if they do fit within the criteria of the type of roles that our clients are working on, we progress them to a 1-hour technical screen. And that's where we really dig into their experience and the value that they provide to their executives, in this case, because we do place administrative support professionals. And then throughout the entire recruiting process with them, we really hold their hand by helping them do interview preps. Those are usually about an hour long. We do all of the interview coordination, we do debriefs with them, and we do help them with resignation support. So if you're not providing these services to your candidates, that's something that you could start doing when you're automating and getting a little bit more time back in your day to create a really great candidate experience that ultimately will generate really positive feedback from the candidates and hopefully referrals to their friends. So another thing that I wanted to touch on is what Brian said about using technology to automate processes so that you can spend time doing the things that are most important, which is being on the phone, building relationships with candidates and clients. And I can't speak to every recruiting firm, but in a lot of cases here at Tack Advisors, a lot of our candidates become our clients and vice versa. And so again, like every single touch that we have with somebody, whether it's on the phone, over email, via text, over LinkedIn, we try to make it as positive of an experience as possible, because that's going to create a flywheel of business for us in the future. Another thing that we talked about is about having people on your team and keeping them in the seat. And so I know that Brian and Cassidy mentioned that here at Tack Advisors, every year that somebody is with us, they tend to generate an average of 200 to 300% more revenue year over year. And so for us, it's really, really important to create a really great experience for our employees and make this as fun and rewarding of a job as possible, because they're going to continue to provide value to us and to our clients in the long run. And so in addition to making sure that we have really, really great onboarding experience and smart continued training for our team, we want to make sure that if they have any feedback for us or any questions, that it's a safe and happy environment, because at the end of the day, like, they're the people who are in the field working with our candidates and our clients every day, and are certainly in some cases more plugged in than I am, being stretched across a lot of different areas of this business to know what our clients and our candidates want. And so I would say those are probably some of the key things that I would mention that are ways that you can create an ROI. And then if you needed assistance with tracking that, stuff that we really dig into on a weekly basis is the stats of our team. And so if you're not tracking your team stats in regards to how many reach outs they're having, how many of those reach outs are converting to live conversations and what we consider connects, and then how many of those are then transitioning over to a technical screen and those are an hour long for us. And from there are being counted as submittals. You should really be getting granular with your team about that. because the longer you sit in the seat and the more refined your recruiting skills get, the amount of reach outs to connects to technical screens should get tighter and tighter, and you should have a much quicker turnaround. And if you're not, then we need to evaluate, where is the miss on your team? Is it in regards to training? Is it in regards to a lack of understanding of what a good candidate looks like, or a lack of understanding of what a client is looking for? And so these are all things that you can get, really kind of clinical and granular with your team to make sure that you're setting them up for success. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Like they mentioned before, at Tack Advisors, we are growing our partnerships program. It's a great way for us to learn about other recruiting firms that aren't in our niche, so that we can refer our clients to you. And if you have any just questions in general about how I operate the business and how I've been able to scale my organization 3x over the past years, please let me know. You can reach me at megan@tackadvisors.co.